Okay, so today we're tackling something that sounds kind of basic, but it's actually super important in C++ dot namespaces.
Yeah, these things might not seem exciting at first glance, but trust me, they can save you a ton of headaches down the road, especially as you dive into bigger projects or start using lots of external libraries.
Totally. And I think the material you sent me, the excerpts from Professor Choi's video,
Mm.
really highlights why this is so crucial. He starts off by talking about this common problem in programming where you have like different parts of your code or even different libraries you're using that might use the same names for things.
Right, like imagine you're working on a project and you've got this function you've named, calculate a discount, but then you include a library and it also has a function called calculate a discount, but they do totally different things.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare. How would the computer even know which one you're trying to use?
Exactly. And Professor Soy points out that this is where namespaces come in. It's like, think about families with the same last name. You might have multiple people named John, but their last names tell you which John you're talking about. Namespaces kind of do the same thing for code.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So it's like giving your code elements these unique family names to avoid those accidental mix-ups.
Exactly. And Professor Soy goes into detail about how you actually create these namespaces in C++.ss. It's pretty straightforward, actually. You use the keyword namespace, followed by the name you want to give your namespace, and then you enclose all the code that belongs to that namespace inside curly braces.
So anything inside those braces is like contained within that specific namespace.
Exactly. It becomes local to that namespace. And this is where things get interesting because now you need a way to access things that are defined inside a specific namespace if you want to use them from outside of it.
Right, because it's like they're tucked away in their own little room. So how do you like knock on the door and get access to what's inside?
Professor Soy explains that there are two main ways to do this. The first one is using something called the scope resolution operator. It's represented by those two colons. You basically use it to specify exactly which namespace a particular element belongs to.
So like if you have a namespace called myTools and a function inside it called formatText, you'd use myTools.formatText to specifically call that function from outside the namespace.
Precisely. But if you're working with a lot of things from the same namespace, it can get a bit tedious to keep typing out the namespace name and those colons every time.
Yeah, I can see how that would get old fast.
Right, and that's where the using statement comes in. It provides a bit of a shortcut. Professor Soy mentions using namespace std, which you often see in C++ code. What that does is basically tell the compiler, hey, for this part of the code, I'm going to be using a lot of stuff from the st namespace, so let's just assume I mean things from that namespace unless I explicitly say otherwise.
So you don't have to keep repeating the namespace name over and over again. That's handy, but I imagine there are some situations where it's still important to be explicit, right?
You're absolutely right. Professor Soy brings up a really important point about ambiguity. Let's say you have a variable in your main program called count, and you also have a namespace with a variable also called count. Even if you've used the using statement for that namespace, if you just write count in your code, the compiler won't know which one you mean.
Oh, I see. It could get confused.
Yeah. In cases like that, you still need to use the scope resolution operator to be crystal clear about which count you're referring to. And, to really drive this point home, Professor Soy uses this fun example of a Gryffindor spells namespace. It's like he defines this enum called spells, and inside it, he has things like Expelliarmus and Lumos. But because he uses using namespace Gryffindor spells, when he wants to use one of those spells in his main code, he can just write spells.expelliarmus, and the compiler knows exactly what he means.
That's a really clever example.
Yeah.
And, thinking about it from a real-world perspective, it makes so much sense. As you start working with larger projects, maybe even collaborating with other developers, namespaces become super important for keeping your code organized and preventing those frustrating name collisions.
Yeah, imagine trying to debug a program where multiple different teams have all used the same name for different things. It'd be a nightmare to figure out what's going on.
Absolutely. It's like trying to have a conversation where everyone's using the same word but meaning different things. Total chaos.
So, Professor Soy really nails it when he emphasizes that namespaces provide this essential structure in C++ that prevents those accidental clashes and just makes your code much more manageable, especially as your projects grow in size and complexity.
And, thinking about it even beyond programming, I feel like this concept of creating distinct spaces or categories is something we do all the time in our lives to stay organized. Like, how do you organize your files on your computer?
Oh, yeah, I've got folders for everything. Music, documents, photos, you name it.
Exactly. And it's the same idea, right? We create these separate spaces to prevent things from getting mixed up and to make it easier to find what we need.
Totally. And it's interesting to think about how that same principle applies to organizing code. It's like namespaces help us create these mental compartments so we can keep track of all the different pieces and make sure they're working together harmoniously.
So next time you see a namespace in C++N, remember it's not just some arbitrary syntax. It's a powerful tool that helps us write cleaner, more organized, and more manageable code. And maybe even take a moment to appreciate how that same concept of compartmentalization helps us stay organized in all areas of our lives. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into namespaces.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.